I first noticed something was off when Lily and Sophie, my daughters, began acting differently around me. They had always been chatty, eager to share every little detail of their day, from school drama to silly TikTok trends they were obsessed with. But lately, whenever I walked into the room, they'd fall silent. They'd glance at each other, their faces tinged with guilt, and quickly change the subject. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was probably just a phase or something they didn't think their dad would understand. Still, it nagged at me. Then there was Amanda, my wife. For as long as I could remember, she'd been steady, predictable even. She wasn't the type to get overly excited about new hobbies or jump into trends, but in the last few weeks, she seemed different. She'd suddenly taken up Pilates. Or at least that's what she said. It wasn't just the workout classes themselves. It was how she came home afterward, looking like she'd stepped out of a high-end salon. Her hair was always perfect, styled in soft curls, not a single strand out of place. Her makeup was flawless, which was strange considering Amanda had always been someone who kept it natural unless we were attending a big event. One evening, she came back in a new designer dress. It was sleek and elegant, the kind of thing she'd usually save for a fancy dinner or a big party. I couldn't help but ask, "Did you have a special event after Pilates?" She laughed, brushing it off. "Oh, this? I had to swing by the mall to pick something up, and I saw it on sale. Thought I'd treat myself. You don't mind, do you?" Her tone was light, casual, but there was something forced about her smile, something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't just the dress, though. It was the way she carried herself. More confident, almost glowing. She'd always been beautiful to me, but this newfound energy made me feel like I was looking at a stranger. I told myself I was overthinking things, that maybe the Pilates classes really had done wonders for her confidence. But there was a flicker of doubt in the back of my mind, and it wasn't going away. Things started piling up after that. Amanda's phone, which she used to leave lying around without a second thought, was now glued to her side. She'd smile whenever it buzzed, a quick little grin that she tried to hide. When I'd ask her who it was, she'd say, "Just the girls from class," and change the subject. At night, when I reached out to pull her close in bed, she'd shift away, claiming she was too tired or not feeling well. It was subtle, these little changes, but they added up. Every excuse, every deflection, felt like another layer to a wall I couldn't see over. Lily and Sophie's behavior didn't help. They'd started whispering to Amanda in hushed tones, their voices stopping the second I entered the room. I caught them exchanging looks a few times, like they were in on some secret they couldn't share with me. One evening, I overheard a snippet of their conversation. Sophie said, "Do you think Dad knows?" Lily shushed her, glancing toward the doorway, and that was the end of it. I stood there, just out of sight, my heart pounding in my chest. Knows what? I didn't press them. I didn't confront Amanda either. Maybe it was cowardice, or maybe I was hoping I'd wake up one day to find everything back to normal. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. Something was happening in my home, something that had started to unravel the life I thought I knew. I just didn't know what. And yet, the worst part wasn't the whispering or the distant glances. It was the silence that followed. That heavy, suffocating silence that only comes when people are hiding something. It settled over our house like a storm cloud, and I was standing in the middle of it, waiting for the thunder to strike. That night, Amanda stayed up later than usual, claiming she had some work to finish in the living room. It wasn't uncommon for her to stay up late, but there was something different about this time. Normally, she'd tap away at her laptop or scribble notes in her planner. But as I lay in bed, I didn't hear the usual sounds of productivity. Instead, there was a faint murmur, her voice barely audible over the hum of the heater. I sat up, straining to hear. It wasn't the tone she used with clients or coworkers. This was softer, warmer. Curiosity gnawed at me, and against my better judgment, I got up and crept down the hallway. Her voice grew clearer as I approached the living room. She was sitting on the couch, her legs curled beneath her, the glow of her phone illuminating her face. She didn't see me standing there, half hidden by the shadows of the hallway. "Jake, I've missed you already?" she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that made my stomach twist. The girls are looking forward to seeing us tomorrow, too. Jake. That name hung in the air like a grenade waiting to explode. My mind raced. I didn't know anyone named Jake in her life. Not a coworker, not a friend from Pilates, not even someone she'd casually mentioned in passing. And the way she said it, the tenderness, the longing. It was as if she were speaking to someone she trusted deeply, someone she cared about in a way that was far too intimate. I stayed rooted in place, unable to move, barely able to breathe. My thoughts clashed against each other. Was I misinterpreting this? Could it be innocent? But the tone of her voice told me otherwise. Yeah, she continued, her words soft but unmistakable. No, don't worry. He doesn't suspect a thing. I've been careful. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I didn't hear the rest of the conversation. My heart was pounding so loudly that it drowned out her words. I stepped back, retreating into the safety of the dark hallway. My hands were trembling, my pulse roaring in my ears. When I got back to our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the closed door. Who was Jake? And what did she mean by he doesn't suspect a thing? Every instinct screamed at me to storm into the living room, to demand answers. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to know more. I needed to be certain. Amanda came to bed an hour later, slipping under the covers as if nothing had happened. She didn't notice the way I lay stiffly beside her, my back to her, my mind racing. I didn't say a word, and neither did she. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again. The way she said his name, the way she talked about being careful. By the time the sun rose, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront her yet, but I wasn't going to let this go either. If she was hiding something, I'd find out. The realization came slowly, like the unraveling of a thread you didn't even know was loose. Over the next few days, I started to notice things. Small details I had brushed off before, now glaringly obvious in the light of what I'd overheard. It wasn't just Amanda who was hiding something. My daughters, Lily and Sophie, were in on it too. Lily, at 12, was always the more observant one, sharp beyond her years. Sophie, at 9, had a way of wearing her emotions on her sleeve. They were opposites in many ways, but they shared one thing in common lately. Their behavior around me had shifted. It was subtle at first. Quick glances exchanged when I asked about their day, muffled giggles that turned into awkward silences when I walked into the room. I tried not to read too much into it, but the pieces started clicking together when I caught them talking in the kitchen. You think Dad will be mad? Sophie asked in a hushed voice, her words tinged with worry. Mom says it's fine, Lily replied, her tone low and steady. She said Jake is just a friend and that Dad wouldn't understand. Jake, there it was again. That name had become a constant presence in my thoughts, a shadow hanging over everything. I froze in the doorway, out of sight, my chest tightening as I listened. But it feels like lying, Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. It's not lying, Lily said firmly. Mom said we're just keeping things private. My stomach churned. Private? Amanda had involved them in this. My daughters, who should have been shielded from adult problems, were now complicit in whatever this was. And the way Lily spoke about Jake, like he was some trusted family friend, it made me sick. I stepped into the room, trying to keep my expression neutral. What are you two whispering about? They jumped, their faces flushed with guilt. Sophie looked down at her feet, while Lily's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. Nothing, Dad, Lily said quickly. We were just talking about school. Sophie nodded, but the way her hands fidgeted with the hem of her shirt gave her away. Is that so? I said, keeping my voice calm even though my insides were churning. It didn't sound like school. Lily opened her mouth to respond, but Amanda's voice called out from the living room. Girls, come help me with the groceries. They bolted out of the room like their lives depended on it, leaving me standing there alone, a hollow ache spreading through my chest. Later that night, after dinner, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Amanda was in the shower, humming a tune I didn't recognize. Her voice carried down the hall, cheerful and carefree, as if nothing in our world had changed. But it had. I replayed the moments in my head. The way Amanda had spoken to Jake on the phone. The way my daughters whispered his name like it was a secret they were sworn to protect. I thought about the look in Lily's eyes, that mix of guilt and defiance, and Sophie's trembling voice as she questioned whether it was lying. They knew. They knew everything. And Amanda had dragged them into it, woven them into her web of deceit like pawns in some sick game. They were just kids, and she had stolen their innocence, made them complicit in her betrayal. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just my marriage falling apart. It was my family. I lay there for hours, the weight of it pressing down on me like a physical force. But beneath the sadness and anger, a cold, determined feeling began to take root. I wasn't going to let this go on. Whatever Amanda was doing, whoever Jake was, it ended here. For my daughters. For myself. For the life I thought we had. This wasn't over. The next morning I woke up early. Amanda was still asleep, her breathing steady beside me as if she didn't have a care in the world. I slipped out of bed quietly, my mind racing. Last night, I had resolved not to let this continue, and now I was ready to take the first step. When I reached the kitchen, I saw it. Her phone sitting on the table. For a moment I hesitated. Invading someone's privacy wasn't something I ever thought I'd do. But this wasn't about snooping. It was about finding the truth, proof of what I already suspected, no, what I already knew. I picked up the phone, my palms damp with a mix of guilt and anticipation. The screen lit up, and to my surprise, she hadn't even changed her password. The same combination we'd shared for years, the month and year of our anniversary. It felt almost insulting, like she didn't think I'd even care enough to look. Once I was in, I went straight to her messages. Most of them were innocuous texts with friends, group chats from her Pilates class. But then I saw a thread with a name that made my chest tighten. Jake. I opened it, my breath catching in my throat as I read. Jake. Last night was perfect. Can't stop thinking about you. Amanda, me too. The girls adore you, you know. They keep asking when we'll see you again. The girls adore him. The words felt like a slap in the face. She'd not only brought this man into her life but into their lives as well. She wasn't just betraying me. She was rewriting our family's narrative. Inserting Jake where I should have been. The messages were endless. Flirty, intimate, filled with inside jokes and references to moments I knew nothing about. She'd sent him pictures. Selfies from the car, her smiling in the kitchen, and one of her in a dress I didn't even recognize. I felt sick. But it didn't end there. I moved to her email, my fingers trembling as I navigated the app. At first, it seemed like the usual clutter. Work updates, store promotions, but then I found it. A confirmation for a dinner reservation. Oakwood Terrace. The name alone made my stomach churn. It was a high-end restaurant, the kind of place you reserved for anniversaries, proposals, or other significant celebrations. The reservation was for two. The date was last week. The night she'd come home late claiming she'd been at a networking event. The cost? For $100. I stared at the confirmation, my grip tightening on the phone. That wasn't a casual dinner. That was a deliberate, calculated evening meant to impress. She'd dressed up for him, laughed with him, probably looked at him the way she used to look at me. I kept scrolling, the knot in my stomach tightening with every email and text I read. She had written to him about plans for the weekend, gushing about how much the girls loved spending time with him. She talked about how natural it felt, how he made her feel alive again. Alive. I set the phone down on the table, my head spinning. The evidence was there, laid out in black and white. There was no more room for doubt, no more excuses to cling to. Amanda was having an affair, and she was dragging our daughters into it, painting this man as some kind of hero in their lives. I looked around the kitchen, at the family photos on the wall, at the worn counter where we'd shared countless breakfasts, where Lily and Sophie had done their homework while Amanda and I cooked dinner together. It all felt hollow now, like a facade that had cracked, revealing the rot underneath. Amanda came into the kitchen a few minutes later, her hair still damp from the shower, a towel draped over her shoulder. She smiled when she saw me. "Morning," she said brightly, her voice too cheerful, Too normal. Couldn't look at her. Not yet. I needed to keep my emotions in check, to stay composed. The storm was brewing, but I wasn't ready to let it loose. Morning, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She moved around the kitchen, humming to herself as if everything was fine, as if our life wasn't unraveling right before my eyes. I watched her for a moment, that cold, determined feeling from the night before hardening into resolve. This wasn't over. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. But I wasn't going to let this slide either. If Amanda thought she could lie her way out of this, she was in for a rude awakening. The next day I reached my breaking point. Amanda had taken the girls to the park. Her voice breezy and casual when she mentioned it over breakfast. I knew better. I knew exactly where they were going. I'd seen the reservation confirmation in her email. The time and place etched into my mind like a wound that refused to heal. As soon as they left, I grabbed my jacket and car keys. I wasn't going to sit at home and stew over this anymore. It was time to face it head-on. The drive was tense, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I navigated the winding roads out of town. The restaurant was over an hour away, nestled in one of those picturesque lakeside towns where everything looked perfect on the surface. The irony wasn't lost on me. When I arrived, I parked a little down the street and walked toward the restaurant. Oakwood Terrace was as upscale as I'd imagined, with white linen tablecloths, a sprawling patio overlooking the lake, and servers dressed like they were attending a black tie gala. I felt out of place in my simple jeans and jacket, but I didn't care. The hostess greeted me with a warm smile as I stepped inside. "Do you have a reservation, sir?" "No," I said curtly, my eyes scanning the dining area. "I'm just meeting someone." I spotted them before she could respond, seated at a table near the large windows that overlooked the water. Amanda was laughing, her head tilted back, her hand resting lightly on Jake's arm. The girls were next to her, Lily animatedly telling a story while Sophie giggled, a massive dessert plate sitting in front of her. They looked happy, carefree, like the perfect little family. Except it wasn't a family, it was a lie. I didn't wait for the hostess to stop me. I walked straight to their table, my steps heavy but deliberate, my heart pounding in my chest. Amanda saw me first. Her laughter died mid-sentence, her smile freezing as her eyes locked on mine. For a split second, I saw a panic flicker across her face before she quickly composed herself. "Who's this, Amanda?" I asked, my voice cold, cutting through the cheerful hum of the restaurant. The girls turned to look at me, their smiles fading as they registered the tension in the air. Jake, to his credit, tried to keep his composure, but I saw the way his hand twitched, the slight shift in his chair as if he were debating whether to stand or stay seated. Amanda opened her mouth, then closed it again, her lips pressing into a tight line. She didn't say a word. Jake was the first to speak, his voice low and unsure. I'm Jake. You must be Amanda's husband." The way he hesitated on the word made my blood boil. "That's right," I said, my gaze never leaving Amanda. "Her husband. And who are you, Jake?" He stammered, fumbling for words. I'm just a friend." "We were just a friend," I interrupted, my voice sharper now. "The kind of friend who goes to $400 dinners and charms another man's daughters?" Sophie's face crumpled, and she looked down at her lap. Lily, ever the protective one, narrowed her eyes at me. "Dad, don't." I cut her off, my voice softer but firm. "Lily, I need to talk to your mom. Why don't you and Sophie go wait in the car?" Amanda finally found her voice. "Nate, don't do this," she said, her tone low, pleading. "Do what?" I snapped, my composure slipping. "Speak the truth? Show them what's really going on." The girls hesitated, looking between us. Amanda reached for Sophie's hand, but I shot her a look that stopped her in her tracks. "Go," I said again, more gently this time. Reluctantly, they slid out of their seats and left the table, Sophie clinging to Lily as they made their way to the exit. Once they were gone, I turned back to Amanda and Jake, the weight of everything crashing down on me. "So," I said, folding my arms, "how long has this been going on?" Jake shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to Amanda, who sat frozen, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Nate," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't the place. Don't you dare tell me this isn't the place," I hissed, leaning closer. "You've been parading this man around like he's part of our family. You dragged our daughters into this, Amanda. Our daughters. And you're telling me now isn't the place." Jake stood then, his hands raised defensively. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble." I turned on him, my glare stopping him mid-sentence. "You should have thought about that before you decided to cozy up to another man's wife." He took a step back, his confidence faltering. Amanda reached for my arm, her touch hesitant. "Nate, please, let's just—" I shook her off. "Save it, Amanda. I'm done listening to your excuses." The tension at the table was palpable, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Around us, other diners were starting to notice, their whispers and curious glances adding to the suffocating atmosphere. Jake muttered something about stepping outside, but I didn't care. My focus was on Amanda, her face pale and her hands trembling as she stared at the table. "Was it worth it?" I asked quietly, my voice thick with emotion. Was he worth throwing all of this away? She didn't answer, and in that silence, I found the answer I'd been dreading. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving her and Jake sitting there in the wreckage of what she'd created. When I walked out of that restaurant, I thought I'd feel relief, like confronting Amanda would somehow bring closure. Instead, I felt raw, exposed, and angrier than ever. I realized that simply calling her out wasn't enough. Amanda had made it clear she wasn't just betraying me. She was dragging our daughters into her mess, rewriting our family's story with herself as the victim and Jake as some sort of savior. That night, after I put Lily and Sophie to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the pile of evidence I had. Her messages, the photos, the dinner receipt, each one a piece of the puzzle I never asked to put together. But now, they were more than just reminders of betrayal. They were weapons, tools I could use to protect my daughters from whatever distorted reality Amanda was trying to create. The next morning, I made the call. Her name was Sarah, a lawyer I'd found after searching for someone who specialized in complex divorce and custody cases. When she answered, her voice was calm but firm, the kind of tone that told me she didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Tell me everything," she said after I introduced myself. I laid it all out. The messages I'd found, the conversation at the restaurant, the way Amanda had involved Lily and Sophie in her affair. I didn't hold anything back, my voice shaking at times as I recounted the betrayal. When I finished, Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your wife is using your daughters as a cover. You need to act quickly." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Deep down, I already knew it, but hearing someone else say it made it real. Amanda wasn't just cheating on me. She was manipulating our daughters, making them complicit in her lies. And if I didn't act now, she'd continue to pull them further into her web. "What do?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "We start building a case," Sarah replied without hesitation. "You said you have evidence. Messages? Photos? Anything that proves what's been happening?" "Yes," I said, glancing at the stack of papers on the table. "Good. Gather everything. Document dates, times, details, anything that shows a pattern of behavior. We'll use it to file for temporary custody." Temporary custody. The words felt heavy, final. I wasn't just fighting for my dignity anymore. I was fighting for my daughters. That day, I got to work. I went through Amanda's messages again, printing out every incriminating text, every photo she'd sent to Jake. I included the dinner receipt, the emails she'd exchanged with him, and even the note Lily had scribbled one afternoon, mentioning how Uncle Jake was so much fun. Each piece of evidence felt like a dagger, cutting deeper into the image of the life I thought we'd built together. But I couldn't dwell on the pain. I had to stay focused. Sarah guided me through the process, her no-nonsense approach keeping me grounded. "This isn't just about infidelity," she said during one of our calls. "It's about her judgment, her priorities. She's making choices that aren't in the best interest of your daughters. and that's what we'll argue in court. I started keeping a journal, recording every interaction with Amanda, every suspicious moment, every time the girls mentioned Jake. I noted how Amanda's behavior shifted when she thought I wasn't paying attention, how she'd glance at her phone and smile when she thought I wasn't looking. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I wanted to throw the whole thing away, to confront Amanda again and demand answers. But every time I looked at Lily and Sophie, I remembered why I was doing this. They deserved better than to be pawns in their mother's selfish game. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. Amanda didn't suspect anything, at least not yet. She continued to act like we were fine, like she hadn't just shattered the foundation of our family. She'd smile at me during dinner, ask how my day was, and kiss me on the cheek before bed. It was infuriating, but I kept my composure. I couldn't afford to tip her off. Not when so much was at stake. By the time I had everything together, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was focused now, controlled. I was no longer reacting to what Amanda had done. I was taking action to protect what mattered most. When I handed the evidence over to Sarah, she flipped through the pages, nodding as she read. "This is solid," she said. "It paints a clear picture of what's been happening, and it shows that your priority is the well-being of your daughters." Hearing her say that felt like a small victory, but I knew the real battle was just beginning. "This is going to get messy," Sarah warned. "But you're doing the right thing. Stay strong." As I left her office that day, I felt a strange mix of emotions: fear, determination, and a deep, aching sadness for the life I thought I'd had. But most of all, I felt ready. Whatever came next, I was prepared to fight for my daughters. I wasn't going to let Amanda's lies define their future. Not if I could help it. That evening, as Amanda left for her so-called fitness club, the air in the house felt heavier than usual. I knew this conversation couldn't wait any longer. The girls deserved honesty, or at least as much honesty as I could give them without burdening them more than they already were. I found them in the living room, curled up on the couch watching one of their favorite shows. They looked so carefree, so innocent, that for a moment, I questioned whether I should say anything at all. But then I remembered the whispers, the secrets, and the way Amanda had dragged them into something they should never have been part of. "Girls," I said, sitting down in the armchair across from them, "can we talk for a minute?" They paused the show, their attention shifting to me. Lily, ever perceptive, immediately sat up straighter. Sophie, on the other hand, looked more puzzled than anything, clutching a pillow to her chest. "What's up, Dad?" Lily asked, her voice cautious. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "I know you've been spending time with Uncle Jake," I began, my voice steady despite the lump forming in my throat. "And I know Mom has told you a lot about him." Lily's eyes narrowed slightly, her lips pressing into a thin line. Sophie glanced at her sister, then back at me, her expression still innocent but tinged with confusion. "Yeah," Sophie said softly. "He's fun. He tells jokes and he's really nice." Lily didn't say anything. She just stared at me, her face unreadable. I took a deep breath. "I need you both to know something. Mom and we haven't been getting along very well lately." Lily's gaze dropped to the floor, but Sophie's eyes widened. "Are you going to break up?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No," I said quickly, leaning forward. "No, we're not breaking up right now. But sometimes adults don't see eye to eye. It's not your fault. Okay? None of this is your fault." Sophie nodded slowly, but her lip quivered. "But why are you fighting?" It was Lily who spoke next, her voice quiet but steady. "Is Jake the reason you and Mom are fighting?" Her question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. I stared at her, my chest tightening at how much she understood. More than a 12-year-old should ever have to. "I don't want to lie to you," I said finally, my voice soft. "Jake is part of the reason. But this isn't about you. You and Sophie are the most important people in my life, and I'll always be here for you, no matter what." Lily looked up at me, her eyes glistening. "Does Mom know you're mad about him?" I hesitated again, unsure how much to say. Your mom and I have talked about it, I said carefully, and we're trying to figure things out. But no matter what happens between us, I want you to know that I love you. That's never going to change. Sophie leaned into Lily, her small frame trembling as tears welled in her eyes. Are you mad at us, Daddy? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. My heart broke at the question. I moved to the couch and pulled them both into a hug, holding them tightly.
No, sweetheart.
I'm not mad at you. I could never be mad at you. You didn't do anything wrong. We sat like that for a while, the weight of the conversation settling over us. Lily eventually pulled away, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. I don't like him, she said quietly. I looked at her, surprised. Jake. She nodded, her gaze distant. I don't know. He acts like he's trying too hard. Like he wants us to like him so much it's fake. I nodded slowly, unsure how to respond. I wanted to tell her she was right, that Jake wasn't someone they should have been forced to know, but I held back. Thank you for telling me how you feel, I said instead. It's okay to feel that way, and if there's anything you ever want to talk about, anything at all, you can come to me. You know that, right? She nodded, and Sophie wiped her tears, giving me a small, tentative smile. Can we finish our show now? She asked. I smiled back, though my chest felt heavy. Of course. Go ahead. As they unpaused their show and the room filled with the familiar sounds of laughter and music, I sat back and watched them, my mind racing. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for them, for their peace, their stability, their right to a life untouched by the selfish choices of the people they trusted most. Amanda had brought this storm into our lives, but I'd make sure my daughters came out of it safe and whole. Whatever it took. The courtroom was suffocating. The walls seemed to close in around me as Amanda sat across from me, dressed in soft pastels and wearing an expression carefully curated to exude innocence and heartbreak. Her lawyer, a sharp-looking man with a silver tongue, stood beside her, ready to launch into the narrative they had crafted. Meanwhile, I sat quietly with Sarah at my side, clutching the file of evidence that had consumed my life for weeks. I wasn't here to play games or sling mud. I was here for Lily and Sophie. Amanda's lawyer started his argument with a polished smile, his voice smooth and confident as he addressed the judge. He painted me as a man too consumed by his work to pay attention to his family, someone distant and unavailable, leaving Amanda to shoulder the burden of parenting alone. He's a good provider, the lawyer said, glancing my way. But providing financially isn't the same as being present. My client, Amanda, has been the constant in their daughters' lives, the caring, attentive mother they've relied on. Amanda played her part flawlessly, dabbing her eyes with a tissue at just the right moments, her expression soft but resolute. When it was Sarah's turn, she stood with the same calm authority she'd had since day one. Your Honor, the evidence we've provided tells a very different story, she began, her tone firm but respectful. She started with the messages, pages and pages of texts and emails between Amanda and Jake, documenting their affair and the extent to which Amanda had involved the girls. She outlined how Amanda had used Lily and Sophie to create a facade, making Jake seem like a family friend while betraying the trust and stability of our home. The children have been put in an untenable position, Sarah said, her voice steady. They've been manipulated into keeping secrets from their father, made to accept a man who is not part of their family as if he is. This isn't about one parent working more than the other. It's about ensuring the children's emotional well-being and protecting them from further harm. When Sarah presented the dinner receipt from Oakwood Terrace and the photos I had taken, the mood in the room shifted. Amanda's composed mask faltered as whispers rippled through the courtroom. The messages, the evidence of deceit, the casual way she had placed Jake at the center of their lives. It was all laid bare for everyone to see. Amanda's lawyer tried to regain control, arguing that the messages were taken out of context, that Jake was simply a friend, and that Amanda had done her best to create a loving home. But the weight of the evidence was undeniable. Finally, the judge spoke, her voice firm and unwavering. I've reviewed the evidence presented, and it's clear to me that the actions of Mrs. Adams have compromised the emotional stability of the children. While it's evident that both parents care deeply for Lily and Sophie, the decisions made by Mrs. Adams raised serious concerns about her judgment. My heart pounded as the judge continued. Effective immediately, temporary custody will be awarded to Mr. Adams. Mrs. Adams will have supervised visitation rights, pending further review. A hush fell over the room. Amanda's face turned red, her eyes wide with disbelief. She leaned toward her lawyer, whispering furiously, but he simply shook his head. When the judge adjourned, Amanda stormed out of the courtroom without looking back at me. I sat there for a moment, the weight of the ruling settling in. I had won the first battle, but I knew this wasn't the end. That evening, I sat down with Lily and Sophie to explain what had happened in the simplest, gentlest way I could. I told them they'd be staying with me for now, and that while their mom wouldn't be around as much, they'd still get to see her. Lily looked at me, her eyes full of questions she didn't know how to ask. Sophie just nodded, her small hand clutching mine. "Does this mean everything's better now?" Sophie asked, her voice small. I smiled at her, though my chest ached. "Not yet," I said honestly. "But it's a start. And no matter what happens, we'll figure it out together." Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding their trust and creating a sense of normalcy. I picked them up from school, helped them with their homework, and made their favorite dinners. We watched movies on the couch, went for walks in the park, and talked about everything and nothing. It wasn't easy. There were moments when Lily's frustration boiled over, when Sophie cried because she missed her mom. But I stayed patient, reminding them every day that they were loved, that they were safe. Amanda, meanwhile, was furious. She called constantly, her voice sharp and accusing, demanding to know how I could do this to her. I let Sarah handle most of the communication, refusing to let Amanda's anger derail the progress I was making with the girls. Deep down, I knew the fight wasn't over. Custody battles were messy, and Amanda wasn't going to back down quietly. But for now, I had what mattered most, Lily and Sophie. And no matter what came next, I was determined to protect them, to give them the stability and love they deserved. This was just the beginning of a long road, but I was ready to walk it. For them, I'd face whatever came my way.